Welcome back to the program. Now we have with us in our studio Mr. Javed Rana, who's a senior journalist, and he'll be speaking to us about the situation in Iraq, where protesters have attacked the embassy, the U.S. embassy over there, as a reaction to U.S. airstrikes that killed 25 fighters. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on our program. So let's just begin with what has happened. Now we're seeing this flaring up of tensions in Iraq. First, we saw that there were protests against the militias by the population. And now you're seeing, after the U.S. strikes on the militias base, and you're seeing that the militia has come out to do protests against the U.S. embassy. Can you just put all of this situation into light for us, please?
The U.S. is crossing its own defined red lines. The first red line was that it would not attack Iran, but it would economically keep on having sanctions on Iran and economically cripple Iran. I think the US has come up with the in-between strategy where they are not attacking Iran directly, not on the soil of Iran, but they have started now attacking Iranian pro-militia groups inside Iraq and in Syria. And 5 places were targeted in Iraq and Syria, and as many as 25 pro-Iranian members of different militias, they were killed. Now, the man who is heading this, he's a pro-Iranian, his name is Jamal Jafar Ibrahim. He has been an Iranian citizen, but at the same time, he had in fact married with the Iranian citizen. And then he had his religious allegiance, known allegiance with the supreme Iranian leader. And he was the one who was previously involved in many militant activities. His group actually was responsible for killing as many as 600 American soldiers from 2004 to 2011, though much of the militancy was triggered by the Sunni factions. So they have a background. Now Iranian militias are there in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and they have a very comprehensive network. Now, the problem is not with the US. US doesn't have that much problem with Iran as much as it is a problem with Israel. Israel is playing through US. And I think it was Israeli pressure, because of which the US has changed its strategy. And
this is, let me just interrupt you here just to get a sort of a background on this, that one of the reasons why the peace deal, the Iran peace, not peace deal, the nuclear deal fell through in 2018 was due to the fact that President Trump wanted to put more pressure on the Iranis for a better deal, meaning to deal with some of these militias as well, right? And this was their aim. So it's not happening in that way. Iran has been very defiant, so now it's happening through these means.
I think that deal was partly because of the apprehensions by Israel, because after 2025, there will be no bar on Iran to manufacture nuclear weapons. And the Americans wanted some sort of change in that deal under Israeli pressure. And the second part, second apprehension was that Iran has been exporting these militias, these militancy in Yemen, in all over Middle East. So basically the problem with Israel is that since Iran has made it public that they don't recognize Israel, and they have time and again said they don't want Israel on the world map. And they have been supporting these militias in Syria, in Lebanon, from where there have been attacks on Israel. And Israel has already been attacking these militias in Iraq, and the border between Iraq and Syria, and parts of the Syria. But now Israel is using American shoulders for its geostrategic objectives in the region. And that is a problematic area, because Americans have their limits. President Donald Trump has a policy not to initiate new wars. He is exiting from Afghanistan. He's exiting from Syria. And from Iraq, they have already their military presence, but that is not in a big number. So the point I'm trying to make, bigger question is, will Israel be able to pressurize President Donald Trump to a tipping point where they can go for a war against Iran? That is unlikely to happen in coming weeks and months, because it is a declared policy of the President Donald Trump that he is going to end all these unending wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan. And that is going to be one of the reasons he thinks that he can win elections in this year, at the end of this year. So in a broader picture, we have to see that this is a conflict between Israel and Iran, and the American shoulders has once again been used. But I really doubt that the Americans would cross a limit to attack directly Iran, because you may recall in late 70s there was an attack on US embassy in Iran, and after that I think there is a similar attack on American embassy in Iraq. Now this group, this pro-Iranian group in Iraq, they have grown from few thousand, 3,000 to 25,000 members of the militias and the supporters. They have a huge support base. But right now, Iraq is divided. People generally in Iraq, they don't want Iranian presence in Iraq. They don't want American military presence in Iraq.
Right.
They want to get rid of them, both of them. But we have to accept...
And President Trump also, he's got a lot of issues in his own country as well, with his impeachment trial going on right now, this very month actually. And then this year is the election year.
I think
and
part of the reason the President Donald Trump faced this trial in the House of Representatives is believed to be because of the fact is Israeli pressure. Israel has been pressurizing President Donald Trump to initiate a war against Iran, something he doesn't want it. And I think that was a signal to the President Donald Trump that if you don't listen to the Israeli lobby in USA, then you can face the consequences. What we have seen during last couple of days, these attacks on Iranian militias inside Iraq and Syria, that is basically trying to pacify that Jewish lobby in the US, that the Americans are, for the first time, in a very meaningful manner, they are trying to cross that limit. But you may recall in September last year, there was Iranians had shot down the US drone, and there was no retaliation, though President Donald Trump said, oh, I had ordered for an attack, but then it was my second thought, no, there will be casualties, so yes, I withdrew those orders. And then it has been
and all the tensions in the Persian Gulf that we saw last year in the Strait of Hormuz with the oil tankers.
Exactly. You know, the pattern from the Iranian government has always been that whenever their interests are attacked, they retaliate. They retaliate through their proxies, and they retaliate in a very meaningful manner. The advantage that they have, that these militias, these militant groups, they are ideologically, on sectarian grounds, they are very loyal to the government in Tehran, to the supreme leader, and that is their strength. And I think situation sooner or later, probably later, would reach to a tipping point where there could be a possible conflict between Israel and Iran. What is going to be the role of the US? I think it would depend which political party is in power in the US. Would it be the Republicans, or maybe if there is no...
Who would you think would be more predisposed to maybe attacking Iran?
I think it will be Republican, but perhaps not President Donald Trump. Or maybe if the President Donald Trump next year, he would not have stakes. He may go for it. But I don't foresee a war against Iran this year, because President Donald Trump has to win the elections, and he cannot win the elections by initiating a new war. Right. And more importantly...
He was always against the war in Iraq to begin with when it started, and under President Bush. And he's been, throughout his elections, he's been speaking against the wars, foreign wars, exactly, never-ending foreign wars.
And geostrategically speaking, I think it is not in the interest of the USA that unless it withdraws from Afghanistan, or at least have some sort of a peace deal with the Afghan Taliban, they would initiate another war. I think situation as I foresee, this conflict between Israel and the pro-Iranian militias in Syria, in Lebanon, and Iraq, that is going to intensify in coming months and weeks. But again, there have already been sort of tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And Iranians have been blaming that Saudi Arabia, in one way or the other, they've been behind the scene supporting Israel. And we have to see the bigger picture. At the heart of the entire conflict is Palestine, the occupied Palestine, which has been under the occupation, illegal occupation of the Israel. Now, the people in Palestine, they don't see a Muslim leadership. First it was Saddam Hussein. He was monetarily sponsoring the Palestinian people, and he was backing them up. And then again, Israel used the influence and the military power of the USA to attack Iraq, got rid of Saddam Hussein, and then Palestinians lost that leadership. Then, unfortunately, we don't find any other Arab leaders or any other Muslim leaders who could have helped Palestinians the way, the manner with which Saddam Hussein has done. Now, the Palestinian, they do see a replacement of Saddam Hussein in shape of Iranian leadership. But the trouble is now that the large population in Palestine and elsewhere in the Middle East, they belong to another sect which is Sunni. They don't feel as much comfortable with the Iranian leaders as they used to be with the Saddam Hussein. Nonetheless, they are getting all kind of military support from Iran and financial support from Iran at a time when the Arab leaders are not ready to help them out. Rather, people inside Palestine, when you talk to them, they would see that many Arab leaders are more in league with Israel when it comes to deciding the very future of Palestine. Unfortunately, when it comes to the question of Palestine, there the role of the US has been very negative and unnecessarily pro-Israel. They have accepted almost all demands of the Israel in terms of recognizing the Golan Heights, which belongs to the Syria, and then very importantly recognizing Jerusalem Al-Quds Sharif as the capital of the Israel. That is not acceptable to the Palestinian, that is not acceptable to the Arab leaders, to the Arab population, not leaders, and Muslim in general. I think until and unless US go back to its previous policy to determine the very fate of the Palestine as per pre-1967 war, these kind of conflict in the region will continue.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on our program, Mr. Javed Rana.